Hey guys, Josh Abandonatto here, host of the Derelict Podcast with a special announcement. Today is Thursday, September 26, 2024. Today marks 6 months of the Derelict Podcast. Thank you so much for being on the journey with us. Thank you for being open to hearing both my and all of our guests' failures, our struggles, the stuff that we're going through, and most importantly, rising men to a new level in a world where masculinity is seen as toxic and bad and evil. We are bringing back true masculinity. We're asking men to rise up together. If you want to be a part of this, please make sure that you are subscribing to our YouTube channel. Please also make sure that you are sharing this. So far, we have 1,000 listens and we have 20,000 views of our various YouTube videos. Here's the goal. We're going to try to get to 10,000 listens by the end of the year, and we're going to try to get to 100,000 YouTube views. And we cannot do that without your help. So if you have enjoyed what you've heard so far and you're getting all this information for free, please, 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 our request and our favor to you is to send it to someone. Send it to somebody that you think it's really going to be meaningful for. We love you so much. We appreciate you. I'm here for the long haul, not going anywhere. This is a huge passion and a mission of mine, and I thank you so much that you're a part of it. Also, if you are not part of the Facebook group yet, please check the show notes and become a part of it. Come to the Derelict Tribe. Men, it's our time to rise up. Love you. Enjoy the episode.
They're empty, and it's still about other people. I think that's the main thing, is like when we look at the manosphere stuff and the manaverse stuff, it's like you want other people to think you're cool because you have the six-pack, because you got the hot wife, because you have the Lamborghini. But that's still boy psychology. That's still based on other people. I think what we're trying to talk about here is man psychology, which is all internal. It's like this internal engine, this internal nuclear reactor. It doesn't matter what other people think because you are so solid in yourself that you are untouchable. You're just like there. You're just going through life.
Welcome to the Derelict Podcast. For the disparaged, depleted, and delinquent souls trying to find our way, we're talking about the scary part of the journey, where we don't know how it'll end. Let's be free to face our fucking failures in real time as the most unadulterated, truest version of who we are. No sugarcoating. Welcome to the shit show, you derelict.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Derelict Podcast. I am your host, Josh Abandonatto, and we have a very special guest, Mark. So excited that you're here. This is Mark 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐤. Did I say it right?
You got it. You nailed it.
Okay, perfect. Like as you told me right before we hit record, as you lay on the beach. So I think I got it right. My last name's a little difficult to say as well, but Mark, as with a lot of my guests, we met online. We started having a conversation. Found out that he has a real passion for men as well. Thank God, we need good men like you in the world, Mark. Thank you for being in the world and doing what you do. He is the founder of Men's Therapy Online, which is just menstherapy.online. And I'll tell you, when I first went to that website, after you told me that it was you, the very first home screen says, face your dragons, with this huge fucking dragon. And I was already pumped. And you know what my first thought was, Mark, too? It was like, I need to redo my website. Because it just got me so excited. It just was like, yes, I want to face my dragons or my demons. Excuse me. I said demons, not dragons. Absolutely. So
the
welcome.
website's awesome, man. It's very different from like a typical therapist website. On purpose.
For sure.
Because we're going for men, right? Usually therapists, it's like, standing stones and, a rainbow and a sunset. But like, I think a lot of guys bounce off of that. So we've gotten only positive feedback on like the kind of heavy metal D&D, heroic journey theming that we do there.
So I just had the privilege of being able to hear the owner of, do you know the water liquid death?
Yes. Yeah.
In the can, right?
Yeah.
I just got the pleasure of being able to hear him speak. He was on a panel of this event that I just went to, and it's very heavy metal, alternative, etc. And that's what it reminded me of when I went to your website. Is like, it was the same thing for water. I mean, he was talking a lot about this, where you have like the Evians and the Fijis and everything in the world, and it's always like flowers and rainbows and unicorns and all that stuff, which is fine. And then he comes in and he's like, fuck you, liquid death. And that's how it felt when I went to your website. Like, yeah, a lot of women get therapy and a lot of softer people want therapy that's like nice and calming and there's a relaxing stream and everything else. But that wasn't the take that I got from you. Not so
It's
far,
not
at
the take.
least.
Yeah, and I think a lot of guys bounce off of that, right? I think a lot of guys, we don't
For
want
sure.
to like be babied or coddled, and some of that other imagery, and that's gonna be a whole other topic down the line of, but like how a lot of women do therapy, and I think what our therapy industry puts forward is it's very emasculating for a lot of guys. So I think they don't even sign up, they don't even start because they bounce off with the kind of like, oh, it's gonna be gentle, you're gonna cry, you're gonna talk about your feelings, you're gonna be a victim, right? Like guys don't want that. We want to be heroes. We want to feel like we're conquering our demons and getting better and improving.
Do you know what I love today? I'm going to give you a little inside scoop, and all the listeners or viewers get to hear this as well. You are my second interview of today. I don't know when this is going to air yet, but you're my second interview of today, and you'll never guess who the first interview was.
Who is it?
A woman therapist.
Okay. Nice to get the contrast back to back.
Who deals with men specifically.
Cool.
And it was really interesting to hear some of her perspectives on things, because one of the first things that she said was, like, obviously I'm a woman, so I can't speak to being a man, but she can speak to how men affect women in their relationships as a marriage therapist and everything else. So it was really fascinating to hear that. And now I get to hear you. And almost for sure when these air, it'll be in that order as well. So if you haven't listened to that yet, by the way, go listen to that one also, because I think that will be probably a good, lineup for this one. So again, Mark, thank you so much for being here. So there's a couple things, if you don't mind me just like mentioning, that I remember you telling me about your story. If we could just start there, where, first of all, you just got married a little bit ago, right?
I did, like a month ago. A
month ago. Yeah. Happy marriage. First marriage? First marriage.
Okay. I just got back from the honeymoon on Saturday. We went to Banff in Canada, British Columbia.
Oh, I've heard amazing things. I've never been though. Really Did you love it?
Loved it. Yeah, we did horseback riding. We did ATVs. We took a helicopter. A lot of like vehicles, but a lot of like seeing the land and just trying to get out there as much as possible, hiking.
That's amazing. It's huge, right? Isn't it just a ginormous?
It's huge. I think it's the biggest national park in Canada. It's massive.
Wow, that's amazing. And there was a couple things that just stood out when we were having conversations that I wanted to talk about. Number one is you're a recovering addict, right?
Yep, that's true.
Will you...
My cat just knocked shit off my desk.
It's all good. We'll see if I edit that out or not. Maybe I'll just leave it in for fun. Who knows? So maybe just tell us a little bit about... Okay, so, when I look at your website, this is a man who's speaking specifically to men and really trying to reach their authentic masculinity, which is what we're all about here. It's the whole reason I have this podcast, is to try to get men to be vulnerable and open with their struggles, their failures, etc., which is very fucking hard for us to do. And you're almost like a spokesman for that, right? Like a spokesman for true masculinity, authentic masculinity, everything else. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that in a second as well. But I guess first, how did you get there? And then also, how did kind of the addiction piece lead into that? Can we start there?
Great question. So I started not feeling very masculine. I grew up, my dad is actually very masculine. He's kind of like the typical stoic dude, very successful in business. He was a dentist and like very handy, like just kind of like had the answer to every question, right? And he was a good model, but a horrible teacher. So I never really learned anything. I had this fantasy of like wanting, the fireside chats and wanting like the sit down conversations. I learned a lot by watching him, and, we're really close now, but growing up, I didn't really have that emotional connection. So mainly my mom was who raised me, and she's also a dentist. And she grew up, it came up in the 80s and 90s, and she was a feminist, right? And kind of that more militant feminist. And I understand her growing up and going into, a science-based field and being one of the only women. She was very negative towards men and negative towards my dad as well. So I got a lot of messaging, not about what it meant to be a man, but what it meant to be a bad man, right? Don't be like this. Don't do that. Don't be like your father. Don't do these things, right? Like it was all negative constantly. And, I was a kid. I was overweight kid. I was a Jewish kid growing up in rural Maryland. I had glasses. I had a little bit of a lisp. Like I didn't stand out, and I got bullied into the ground. So I didn't really fit in with men growing up. I spent a lot of time on, video games, Dungeons and Dragons, just really isolating, never really, maturing, just kind of staying a boy, having a lot of self-hatred, suicidal thoughts, the whole gambit. A lot of guys my generation, actually, that's a very common story. So then I went to college, and, I heard the thing, go to college and reinvent yourself. And I was like, great, I kind of hate myself. So this is my opportunity to become a better version of myself. But because I didn't have guidance or education, the better version was what a, 15-year-old thinks it is. It's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and it says toxic masculinity. And that's I'm sure you talk about that a ton, but kind of my version of it was I could never say no to anything. And I was all fronting. I was all facade. So when I was in a situation where drugs were available, right, I was like, yes, I will do that. No problem. Like, I'm not a pussy, right? Whenever there was risky behavior, someone had to drunk drive to pick up more booze or whatever, right? That was me. Whenever there was like an opportunity to, hit on a girl or like push the envelope, right? That was me. I was, involved in the underground rave scene in Pittsburgh. So a lot of that involved interacting with criminal element. A lot of that involved, just kind of like being in a lot of sketchy places, right? And from fear, truly from fear, like I kept throwing myself over and over again into these like really dangerous situations. But on the inside, was still that like nerd.
Wait, can I ask you where? So you said it comes from fear. Like where? Expand more on that. Like where did that come from? Why do you feel like you had to? It almost sounds like you had to prove something to the world. I don't know who you're proving it to, but you had to prove something of like, yeah, I'm not a pussy. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to do that. Where do you think that came from?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's like insecurity, right? Like I said, a lot of it was from that bullying past, not fitting in with guys. All of a sudden, I just like got that. All of a sudden, I was like, cool, because I had access to drugs, right? Like I could get cocaine for people. I could get acid for people, I was like the hookup, right? So I was getting something which was belonging, right? That I'd never had in my entire life. So I didn't want to let go of that, right? I was so afraid of being on the outs, of being judged, of going back to being in that kind of like lower rank on the totem pole that everything was based on. Like I said, it was fronting. Like, I don't know if I was ever really interested in that stuff. I like electronic music. I like dancing, but a lot of it was just like, I didn't want anyone to see me be weak, or like I said, say no to anything.
What was the fear there? If they saw you as weak?
Yeah, I think that they would push me out, right? That I would go back to like being bullied. I would go back to being alone, right? I would feel like an outcast, that they would see through it because, like I said, I was afraid. So like, I'm doing these like lines of cocaine, or I'm like all of a sudden in some like weird drug dealer's house, and internally I am terrified because I grew up pretty sheltered. I grew up in, like I said, rural Maryland, and then going to Pittsburgh, which is a pretty intense city. There's a lot of pain there. There's a lot of crime there. And just being in these situations and like trying not to flinch, trying not to let people see how I was really feeling on the inside, because if they felt that, again, I would be outcast. I'd be pushed away. I might even get hurt. I might even get robbed. I was in some situations where like there was weapons around, like
right.
It was not, they were not safe places where I was going.
Well, you're speaking on the Derelict podcast right now, and the word derelict means disparaged and outcast. So it's interesting that you're using those words, because I think that as men, I obviously picked that word on purpose because I feel like a lot of the times as men, trying to be real men, whatever that means, and we're going to obviously touch on that a little bit today, but men trying to be authentic, strong men, I think we can feel pretty outcast doing that, right? And you found some community, some belonging, some validity with being the drug guy, right? Or, being the nerd or whatever it is. We're all looking for that, obviously. And I think it's really hard for men today to not feel outcast, to not feel disparaged, to not feel just on the outs. So, man, what a beautiful turnaround your story is, right? You've essentially went from a place where you were feeling disparaged, outcast, etc. Maybe you still do at times, I don't know, but to like belonging, like how do I bring men together? So Continue. I want to hear the rest of the story. I'm interested to hear how this played out.
Well, and how do I bring them together in a healthy way? Because although I did have kinship in those times, I was part of like an extremist political group called the Black Bloc, kind of later turned into Antifa, if you've heard of them on the news and stuff like that. But it was basically like the proto version of that, kind of an anarchist group. And in being involved with that, I had a lot of kinship, right? I was hanging out with a lot of dudes. I felt like I was strong. I had like a gang, like I had all these things. But when you peel back the layers, a lot of those guys, including myself, were, addicted to drugs. We were lost. we were angry at the world or angry at our parents, you know. A lot of us were frauds in a way. Like the word derelict is interesting too, because we lived like derelicts, right? We like lived in warehouses and communal living and bunks and things like that. But like, I'm a Jewish kid, son of two dentists. Like I grew up like
yeah, it's not like you came from that. Right.
Yeah, I didn't come from that, right? Like I grew up pretty well.
Yeah, middle
like,
class, etc. Yeah, it's not what you would expect, right?
Yeah, no, I would expect it. I was just denying that, right? I was just like living in fear because again, when that being like kind of like an anarchist group, being poor was being cool, right? So like I didn't want anyone even to know that I was the son of two doctors, right? Like that would have cast me out. There was so much like
was there shame even in that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Like there was so much of that, like being Jewish. I didn't talk about that because there's anti-Semitism in those groups. I mean, it was just lies upon lies upon lies. And I ended up doing kind of the nice guy syndrome thing of like people pleasing and chameleoning myself based on what environment I was in. And in that, I lost myself, really. You know, I mean, the drugs also didn't help, but I lost myself. So, you know, long story short, it took like an overdose for me to wake up. To get into therapy, to start like looking and trying to discover who I actually am and embrace all parts of myself rather than putting on this fake facade. So did that, went in recovery world, you know, did AA for a couple of years, went to graduate school, did men's groups after that. So I've been in men's groups for about over 10 years. And that idea of like the camaraderie, the connection, the community, you know, back to what you were saying. And I'm curious, what your experience is too with that of like, I think men need to talk to other dudes because we're so, at least in my experience, it was, again, everyone was fronting. Like, as much as I was fronting, so was probably everyone else that was hanging out in that warehouse, right? We were all just, like, lying to each other, and we were all deeply afraid, I think, of, like, being seen as weak. And it wasn't until I got into, you know, therapeutic spaces and men's workspaces where I was like, oh, everybody feels this way. And it's not really about, like, being a certain type of man. It's about like claiming your own type of man, right? Like being internally consistent, having your own set of values, you know, striving towards your own goals, having meaningful connections with people in your life. Like there's not like one answer. Because like when I was growing up, I thought there was just one answer, and it's like everyone's trying to compete to be the, you know, toughest dude, the baddest dude out there. And that's just not the case when you get down to it. You know.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of conversations the last couple months with several guests now about the whole idea of toxic masculinity, and you know, I'm now of the opinion that I don't think it's a thing, and I'll explain that. What I mean by that is either somebody's living out their masculinity or they're not.
Yeah.
So they might be toxic, or they're masculine. So they're either acting masculine or they're acting toxic. I don't think there's such a thing as toxic masculinity, but it gets thrown around all so often. But let's just use that as an example. You know, there's a lot of guys out there right now who will remain nameless. We've named them on the show before, but you already know who they are, that have more of that kind of toxic masculinity feel. And, you know, they're very popular and they get a big social media following and everything else. And I remember, you know, the first time we talked about this a few months ago, one of my guests was talking about how, you know, his thought or opinion of why they were getting so many followers is because there's so many men out there that just want somebody to say that being masculine is okay. We live in a world where it's just not okay anymore. You can't be masculine. The antidote for most people I've found in this society, from what I hear, is the antidote to, you know, bad masculinity or whatever is femininity instead of healthy masculinity, right? So I think it's interesting going back to what you were talking about as far as trying to feel like you're fitting in with the rave and everything else, and you're putting on all these fucking faces, right, and all these masks just to try to fit somewhere where you don't really fit, but you feel like they're accepting of you. And one thing that this guest said a couple months ago was that he thinks that's part of the reason why toxic masculine figures are so popular and so many men are following them, because they're some of the only men out there right now that are actually saying, hey, it's okay to be masculine. Now, that comes with a lot of downsides of people that are, you know, claiming that they've slept with 2,000 women or 2 million women or whatever the fuck, you know, and just working out and doing all that shit. But to your point, they're all just as insecure and vulnerable and open to these things as we are. It's just that that's the way that they go to maybe try to, I don't know, feel better about themselves. So when you went through that, it's kind of a long-winded way of asking you another question. When you went through that overdose, and you kind of had your moment. 12-step talks about them as far as spiritual awakenings, right? And we all have spiritual awakenings in our life. Whether you feel like you're a spiritual or religious person or not, a spiritual awakening is simply a time where you go through something that it clicks. And you're like, oh shit, this isn't who I am. I've had several of them in my life. It sounds like you did as well.
Absolutely.
Can you tell me a little bit about that? Like what did that spiritual awakening look like when you went through, you overdosed, you almost died? What happened? How did that turn you into the man that you are now?
Yeah, so in that particular one, I mean, the big thing is that the facade broke, right? I couldn't lie anymore. It got way too real. And this is after like having friends that had also overdosed and died, right? This is also after like, being arrested and put in jail for a weekend, not something too long, but just like, having all these wake up calls. And, again, in AA, they talk about these messages and, sometimes they say like, God gives you a tickle and then they like throws a brick in your face and then he smashes you with a boulder. And like, for me, and I think for a lot of addicts, like it takes the boulder. Now I think I'm more spiritual and I can notice those tickles a little bit faster. Doesn't have to get to the boulder. Doesn't have to get to that like rock bottom moment. But, at that point I was very insecure and because that fear was like living in my system. So yeah, it was this thing of like, okay, this got way too real. It was only because I was dating my RA in college at the time and she had Narcan as part of like the med kit that they have. That's the only reason that my life got saved is she would just happen to be there.
Oh, wow.
If she wasn't there, I probably would have died because I would have been alone in my dorm room, right? Like just would have been alone. So nobody would have found me, So it was just these moments of like, holy shit. I don't know if I got saved. I don't know if I'm ready to say that, but just like almost getting a second chance and being like, this is when it's time to stop. This is way too serious. And in that moment, I mean, I woke up in the hospital. I was in tears. Like I went all the way back to being that insecure kid. All that stuff melted because I just got kind of scared straight, basically. I wasn't this tough guy. I wasn't able to handle these things. I don't think anyone can handle an overdose. I mean, it sucks, right? Like there's no good way to do it. But yeah. And just with that and with the help of my girlfriend at the time, like just pushing away from that group, not hanging out with them again, getting into therapy at the time, going to my college counseling center, just like starting to get resources, and being like, yeah, I need to really reverse direction or this might and probably would have happened again.
Wow. That's powerful. Yeah. I the longer I live in my life, the less I don't believe in coincidence at all anymore. I just don't. And I don't mean coincidence of like a leaf falling on a certain place on the street. Like that's not what I mean by coincidence. I mean the fact that I just everything in my life, I wouldn't say that it looks like it's orchestrated all the time, but I also don't think that it's a coincidence. I think that whether you want to call it God or higher power or universe or spirituality or whatever you want, whatever you feel comfortable with, I think is all basically the same thing where there is some sort of plan or something that is happening to where we get. Because frankly, every time I haven't thought that way and I've thought, oh yeah, things are just a coincidence, it's just not, because the more time that goes through and I see what happened, just probably with you as well, the more you see what happened, like you had to do this step to get to this step, to get to this step, to get to this step to where you finally paid attention. Right.
Absolutely.
And I agree with you. I've been to plenty of 12-step meetings, and I'll tell you what, the people that have the God tickle, I think is what you called it, story is very compared to the ones that have the boulder moment.
Yeah, for most of it, it's the Mulder moment.
For sure.
Because
and especially as guys too, right? Could you speak to that? Like, what about that as far as guys go? I mean, what do you see about that as far as like your practice and the guys that you work with? Do you see the same thing?
Yeah, definitely, right? I mean, the number one thing that brings guys to therapy is divorce, right? And for most guys, right, that are not on the addict track or have a chronic illness or whatever, right? Like divorce is the rock bottom, right? Their life falls apart. They lose their relationship. They lose their family. They lose their kids. Oftentimes they spiral, they lose their job, sometimes they start drinking, right? I mean, it's like that is the collapse for like most dudes. Yeah, there you go.
You're talking to one. That's how I got into therapy. So yeah.
Yeah, that's the number one reason. And I wish it weren't the case, right? I wish you would have a guy that will come in and say, hey, something is not right with my relationship. Hey, I feel like my communication with my wife is not where I want it to be. hey, I think I'm keeping some secrets from her that might come out. How do I deal with this proactively? But I think it goes back to the, and I agree, there's no toxic masculinity. I think it's like boy psychology that just doesn't die early enough, right? And I think there's a lot of boys out there, and not that many men, not enough men, because I do believe that like men are made, not born. Like most, I guess in America, I think like most males do not become men, right? They stay boys forever, and that becomes that toxic masculine kind of archetype. But yeah, so you have these guys that haven't done any of this work, and they're still acting like a boy. They still are trying to be cool in the playground, just like I was doing, right? They're still trying to be a chameleon and say whatever they need to say to fit in. They still don't want to display any weakness and be vulnerable, because as boys, that's what we do to like try to be cool and fit in and like not get bullied, right? Like I'm in it. I'm not judging. I am that guy. So it starts to fall apart after something like that. And I wish there was more initiation. There was more kind of letting guys know it's okay to get help proactively so that we can listen to those tickles. And I think like, I'm a spiritual person. Sounds like you're a spiritual person. I do believe that there is some kind of order or higher power that's giving those tickles. But even if you don't believe in that, if you're a listener, you don't believe in that, the tickle is like emotional intelligence, right? It's like having the emotional intelligence to understand subtle signs before it becomes the boulder, right? Before you get smashed by life, being able to like read the vibes, right? And be like, okay, this is off. I need to deal with this now instead of it becoming a crisis down the line.
Yeah, I often call it my gut or my God, right? So if you're listening, watching, whichever one you feel more comfortable with. Do you feel more comfortable on a spiritual side? It's God, higher power, whatever. Do you feel more comfortable where it's your gut, intuition, etc.? It's one of the two. It's those little tickles, right? And the tickle's either coming from the universe or the tickle's coming from within, but it's there somewhere. So
it's there somewhere. Yeah. And I think it takes skill to be able to recognize it, right? Like,
yeah. So
I
what does that look like?
That out the box,
So what does that look like?
I think for a lot of guys, it's therapy. I mean, I guess ideally it's male mentorship, right? It's like hearing from older guys about struggles they've been through, about messages they should have listened to, about hearing about pitfalls that they fell into. So then when you're going through, you're like, oh shit, I remember what Jerry said about so-and-so. Like maybe I'm on the same path. Okay, maybe I should, U-turn sooner rather than later. I think ideally it's male mentorship, but I don't think our culture really does a good job at that. So unfortunately, it has to be a service like therapy, or a spiritual community or spiritual practice, or following digital mentors, on YouTube or Instagram or whatever. Like I think there's ways to get it. I just, again, I wish it was more built in. I wish I do too. Really valued it.
Absolutely, I do. And again, to make a plug for this podcast and everything else, is what we're trying to build here. Is we're trying to build a tribe of mentorship and guys that can come in and feel open and vulnerable. It's why I talk so openly about my struggles and failures on this podcast, because I really feel like you got to get naked first if you want other guys to as well, right? Like you have to open up, you have to open the kimono in order for other guys to open the kimono, because otherwise we're all just, measuring dicks all day long. And I do it all the fucking time, man. I'm not saying that I don't do it, but I guess, here would be my question for you. So for the listeners and the viewers that are watching this right now, and they're like, yeah, these guys are spot on. I know that it would be nice if I could be a little bit more vulnerable about my struggles and do it in obviously a safe space where some guy's not going to just, again, be measuring dicks with me, but instead can actually go through these things, but they don't really know where to go. They don't really know how to get mentorship. Maybe they're not ready to jump into therapy yet, because obviously you have a good resource for that. Like, what would you tell them? What could they do today?
Yeah.
Would you say?
So a couple of things. I mean, I think for a lot of guys, doing a men's retreat can be really powerful. There's a ton of those out there. We run them, but I would also look at the Mankind Project as probably the biggest company that's doing them, and they have chapters like all over the world. There's a lot of places where you're going to get that kind of like dose over a weekend. And look, if it's like too weird or woo-woo for you, whatever, you wasted a weekend. Maybe you like made a friend, at least you got to go hiking or something, right?
Right.
Like you get something out of there. And I think that's a much easier commitment for guys than doing long-term therapy or even a men's group, which, really takes years to really be powerful. I think they are very powerful, but you don't get it right out the gate. So I would say just like, hey, Google men's retreat, I think other things is
Well, and you're being humble right now too. You do men's retreats also, right?
we also do them. Yeah.
Okay, so check the show notes, everybody that's listening, and Mark's information will be there. He's just a humble guy, so he's not sponsoring his own stuff, but I will sponsor it for him.
Thank you.
Go to one of his men's retreats, check out his website. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, check that out. Yeah, we do 3 a year.
Okay, awesome.
But again, there's also some that are local. But so there's that, and then again, I get a lot of value out of what I call virtual or digital mentors. So I think this podcast is a good example. My podcast is a good example. I think you can also check out some of the traditional men's writers. So I got a lot out of Robert Bly. I got a lot of the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover.
That's a great book.
Dear Man by David Ada. Yeah. Way of Men by Jack Donovan. I think those are my 4. But like, there's a lot of that. I think going on YouTube and Instagram and finding guys that aren't in the kind of manosphere, Andrew Tate world, there are us that are talking. We're not as big because I think this movement is slower and I think it's more countercultural. So I think it takes some more. The points are more nuanced, so they're not as like snappy.
If we're not talking about how you are either going to get really buff,
right,
or you're going to get all the women, or you're going to get all the money, why would I listen?
Right, we're talking about like long-term happiness.
Yeah,
it takes a long time, and it's
fuck
like
that. I'd rather just
linear.
have a body that's in shape and go fuck a bunch of women and have a bunch of money.
Yeah.
But come on, guys. Like, seriously, come on, guys. Anyone that's listening, like, it's not that only total losers listen to this podcast. If you are listening to this podcast or watching it right now and you have made more money, did it really fucking satisfy you? Did that 6-pack really satisfy you? Did sleeping with another woman really satisfy you? Because I've done all those things in my life and none of them have fucking satisfied me. Have they for you?
No, they haven't.
Because they don't. They can't.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Yeah, they're empty. And it's still about other people. I think that's the main thing is like when we look at the manosphere stuff and the metaverse stuff, it's like you want other people to think you're cool, right? Because you have the 6-pack, because you got the hot wife, because you have the Lamborghini, right? But like that's still boy psychology, right? That's still
Absolutely
based on other people. I think what we're trying to talk about here is man psychology, which is like it's all internal. It's like this internal engine, this internal nuclear reactor that like it doesn't matter what other people think because you are so solid in yourself that you are untouchable. Right? You're just like there. You're just going through life.
I'll give you an example. I met these guys the other day at a conference that I was at. And this guy that I met was just super humble, super down to earth, great guy, retired, probably like 70-ish or so. Yeah. Still there just to learn and like encourage people. He clearly was a mentor, everything else. And we just had a great time. We kind of chatted together. Then I found out that he's like a 100 millionaire, right? Like just, you'd never know. Because the guy's just down to earth. He's an awesome guy. He literally texted me, he's like, anytime you need to talk about business or anything else, just reach out. Just fucking fruit of the earth, right? He invited me to this breakfast as this other guy was kind of leading to chat about some programs and business stuff. And it was a pretty small group of us. But that guy was there, and he, how do I say this nicely? He was like right out of the show Billions, if you've seen that show.
Yeah.
Or Succession, or any of the Billionaire New York type of shows. That's just what he was like. And he actually, anyway, I'll leave it at that because I don't want to give anything away. So he was just kind of like that. And I could tell just based on his countenance and everything else that it's all about like me. Oh, no. I'm successful. I did this. Look at my fancy suit. Look at my douchey hair. And then literally, I think it was his wife. I don't know because he never even introduced her. Was sitting right next to him the whole time with the done lips, the done eyes, like all the face was done, the boobs were done, like everything was just, completely fake. And if you ever meet some of those people, and I'm not saying always, I'm not trying to make a judgment call over all of these people, but sometimes they just look dead in their eyes. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm talking about? Like they're just, like they've tried everything to feel some sort of love and worth in this world, and it just isn't working. And she just looked like that. Didn't say anything, just sat there. Like I went up and made a big effort to be like, hey, how's it going, etc. And like she kind of lit up a little bit like, oh, somebody's talking to me. Like I'm not just here to, be eye candy or whatever. And that to me was the perfect example of boy psychology, what you're talking about. This man who has literally anything any man thinks that he wants. He was in great shape, could buy any suit he wants, super rich, great looking wife, and just it all just seems so meaningless. Like I'm sitting there with him, I'm like, you know what? I wouldn't trade my life for that much money and power and women and everything. I just wouldn't, because it doesn't look appealing at all. But why is it? I don't know. What do you think, Mark? Why is that? Why do we think that that's so appealing? Why are men drawn to that?
Right? We're insecure. I mean, I think like what that guy was lacking is a concept that I don't think gets enough talk these days, but the concept of gravitas, right? Go back to like Latin, right? And gravitas is from the root word of gravity, right? It's just like weight, right? Someone with gravitas has weight. And the idea of when you talk about some of these male mentors, doesn't matter what they're wearing, doesn't matter how hot their wife is, right? Doesn't matter how ripped they are. But there's some dudes, and some of them are very humble looking, like the guy you talked about. Now, like when they talk, they speak with weight and they speak with gravitas.
For sure.
And you're like, oh shit, this guy knows something, right?
Every time that man spoke, the first man I was talking about, I paid attention.
Yes.
Before I knew anything about him, I didn't need to know that he was wealthy. I didn't need to know that he had a bunch of success. I didn't need to know any of that, because when he spoke, I was like, wow, this man is rooted in himself so well. And how cool is that? And another thing, you know, just to talk about this real quick too, because a lot of people get opinions about people that are wealthy, either good or bad. It's indifferent. I just gave you two examples of two very wealthy people that are completely different as far as that gravitas within them. I think that's a great word. Yeah, that's awesome.
Right. And like the guy that doesn't have it, when he talks, like you don't pay attention. It's flimsy. It's frail. You know, there's like nothing there. You know, one of the lessons that my dad did teach me, which was amazing, he said, you know, there's two types of men out there. There's men that judge success by who they can pay to do things for them. And there's men who judge success by what they can do themselves. And like, what man do you want to be? Right.
I love that.
And I'm a very DIY person, but that's where my values are, is like, I think we talk about gravitas. It's a guy who can do shit himself, whether that is, you know, traditional skills, the trades, craftsmanship, whether it's business ownership, whether it's, you know, the discipline it takes to exercise, right? I don't think that the end product matters, but I do think the discipline is very respectful, you know, versus the guy that just has all these hired goons, right? That just has, but actually isn't capable, right? Just has resources, just has privilege, right? But isn't capable, hasn't been through stuff, hasn't struggled, hasn't sat down and actually had a real conversation in maybe decades with that second individual that you talked about. You know, I think there's a lot of value for men. And I think it's a very masculine idea of like being capable, whatever it is, right? Being good at stuff and actually like overcoming challenges. That's how we grow. And I think the man who decides to avoid challenge goes back to being a boy. You know, I think real men.
You know, so we talked about this on the last podcast episode. So again, go listen if you haven't heard it yet. But what you just said is key, absolutely key. Yeah. And that is, I firmly believe that men step up with challenge. Yeah. And we need challenge, right? We don't step up if we're not challenged. We need challenge. Now, it's not challenge just for challenge's sake. Challenge allows us to step up. We have to have that challenge. And what you just said, I think, is key to even addiction, right? If we're not being challenged, or we are trying to avoid the challenge that's in front of us, maybe a better way of saying it, we'll figure something else out to feel challenged, right? And for you, it was like, oh man, I don't feel like I have this community or anything else, and I'm not really being challenged, or maybe the challenges in front of you just ignored. So now, instead of ignoring those challenges, I'm going to go do other challenges. Oh, if I get drugs and share them with my friends, which is a challenge and difficult for me to do. I don't know how to do that. I'm from a fucking family of suburbanite dentists, right? Like I don't know how to do that. Yeah. But maybe if I do that, then they'll let me in the club. And then there's these other challenges of, okay, but then I can't talk about being from middle class. I can't talk about being Jewish. I can't talk about these things. Instead of just stepping up to the challenge that was in front of you.
Yeah.
God, the universe, spirituality, whatever you want to call it. Something was challenging you in that moment. And you chose, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to deal with this challenge until you almost died.
Right. I mean, I was doing what a lot of young men do, which is seeking danger and seeking challenge. I just didn't have a guide and I wasn't open to guides. I'm not going to like be a victim. Like I also wasn't open to guides. There were tons. My dad would have been there. Other men would have been there. You know, it took, my therapist at the time to get through, but like I wasn't guided. But I think, exactly what you said, seeking challenge, seeking danger is critical for men. And I think it's so easy, especially in like Western American culture, right? Talk about male privilege. Like we can coast and be fine and never encounter challenge. And I think for me, that is actually the weakness, right? The weakness is the coasting. It's seeking comfort. It's staying in the cocoon, whatever you want to call it. There's tons of different ways to talk about it, but like putting those blinders on, like you mentioned, and just being in denial, dissociating from life rather than just like seeking challenge. And I do think the modern man has to seek challenge because we don't get it.
That's a really good point.
You know?
Yeah. So you said seeking challenge, seeking danger. Can you expand on that a little bit? Or maybe said a different way for people that are listening or watching right now, what do they do? Like if I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, that sounds great. How do I seek challenge and danger? Like what does that look like, do you think?
Right. So there's different realms, right? The first realm, what most guys start and end at, is the physical realm, right? So a classic way is, setting a fitness challenge or signing up for a marathon or doing a retreat or a backpacking trip. And again, I do think that's valuable, especially for young men, because we need to know that we're strong. I think strength is actually really critical to masculinity. And it's not about the six pack, but it is about the discipline required to like train for something. But again, I think our culture being a like warrior culture, it ends there. But there's always other challenges. There's emotional challenges.
But before you even go on to one of those other challenges, the other thing I just want to encourage people to do too, that I know I've gotten stuck in myself and I just feel like a failure because like, I'll see these workout challenges and then I decide I just really don't like lifting weights. So does that make me not a man? And here's what I would say to anybody that is, don't let somebody else put on you whatever that is. Like you just mentioned probably 6 or 7 different things that are different things. So maybe it is getting in the gym and getting a six pack. Maybe it's going on a backpacking trip. Maybe it's going on a really long hike. Maybe it's doing a triathlon. That was one of the biggest challenges that I decided to do. Like I never swam before or anything. I mean, I knew how to swim, but I never had swam and I hardly biked and I barely run. And I was like, I'm going to do a triathlon.
Yeah.
Because that seems fun in a weird way, right? Like, so I guess what I'm trying to say too is don't let somebody else dictate what that is for you. It's going to be difficult and challenging and you're going to have habits. That also doesn't mean it can't be fun. Like it also doesn't mean it can't be something that really you're excited to do. Like if you hate fucking running, don't just run a marathon just because, right? Do something else. Sign up for a long swim, do a backpacking trip, whatever, right?
I agree.
So just try, not that any of you guys need permission from this, but I'm just trying to give you fucking permission to do something that still sounds like something you would want to do.
Yeah. And what I tell a lot of my guys, so there's this Buddhist saying, which is there's 10,000 doors to the Dharma, right? There's 1,000 paths, 10,000 paths. But you do have to do it, right?
You have to do one. Pick one of the paths.
You have to pick one. Because again, in that you're developing things like discipline. You're developing things like, being able to delay gratification. You're developing things like being able to, measure something, whether it's you're measuring your macros or your lifts or your time, right? Like being able to like really like see data and understand how to improve. Like these skills are what's important. The actual dressing doesn't really matter, right? But I think there's a lot of value in taking that on. Even just like camping alone, right? Like that's a big challenge for a lot of guys. So physical challenge. And again, I think we start and end there. And what I see a lot of older guys do is that they still go to this physical well when actually they've mastered the physical, right? And what we need to go is now into the emotional or the mental challenge. So what that can look like is getting into therapy and healing your trauma, right? What that can look like is being a mentor, right? Becoming a mentor for somebody and actually investing in another human, right? For a lot of guys, it looks like fatherhood, right? Actually showing up and being a good dad. That's a real challenge. For some people, it can be starting a business or being a team leader or, showing up for somebody after somebody in your family died, right? These are challenges that are not as recognized in our culture because, we get stuck on the 30-day push-up challenge or whatever. But like, how many times have you been to a funeral and the guys don't know what to fucking do, right? And the man that does show up is so powerful, right? Back to that gravitas idea.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I just was thinking about something that one of my main mentors says to me all the time. And I've been mentoring guys. I mean, I started mentoring guys when I was a kid. I've talked about it on the podcast before. Like I've just always had a heart for mentoring guys. I still mentor guys. And, again, So here, just as a side note real quick, again, listeners, viewers, there are two men right here that want to mentor you, that want to help you figure your shit out. So reach out to us. All of Mark's stuff will be in the show notes. I say this on every single episode, I think. My email is in the show notes of every single episode. And the reason it is not so some fucking virtual assistant will send you some, or AI will respond to you. I will respond to you. So if you reach out, I will respond to you. I'm here for you. Mark is also here for you. So please reach out. But one of the things that one of my mentors says to me that constantly reminds me why I love mentoring so much is he said his experience has been that anytime you get in your own head about something and you're feeling this fear, anxiety, whatever this issue is, one of the surefire ways of getting out of that is to go find somebody to serve. And that's really critical. And I don't mean serve like servitude, servant, serve. I just mean, is there somebody that you could just shoot a text to and say, hey man, was thinking about you. It's been a while. Let's connect. Yeah. I just wanted you to know that you're a courageous brother of mine and I love you. I posted on my social media today, which will be however many months ago when this episode airs. But one of the things I posted on my social media today is I literally just took a video walking around my house telling all the men in my life that I love them. Because we never say that to each other. Like, how often do you say that to your guy friends? I mean, maybe you've gotten in a better habit of doing it. I've tried to get into a better habit of doing it, but we got to band together. Like, I love you guys. Yep. Like, and that's okay. That's not showing some sort of weird, weak vulnerability or something. It's just that we have to be here for each other, because if we're not, then what happens, to your point, Mark, is that these young guys, they don't know where to go. And then they pick the Andrew Tates of the world, I guess I'll drop his name, or whoever else that is out there that's shiny, like a muscle car. And you're like, oh, the muscle car looks great. Yeah, but is that really what you need? Yeah. Or do you need like a fucking hybrid to get your kids back in school? You know what I mean? Like, is that what you need? So, yeah, good stuff. Yep.
But I think what he's offering, right, is twisted, but what he's offering is masculine love.
Absolutely,
right? That's what you're talking about.
That's why people follow him. And I honestly, like, there's a lot of things that he say that I am fully on board with, that I really agree with. I think he actually does speak a lot to really healthy masculinity. And then he starts, losing me when he is sleeping with everyone under the sun and he thinks all these things are healthy, which they're not. These guys that have this idea that you can just sleep with as many women and it doesn't affect you at all is fucking bullshit. Just because I'm a guy doesn't mean I can go sleep with 2,000 women and it won't affect me. And then a woman who sleeps with 2,000 guys, it affects them. That's fucking bullshit. You will be connected to that person if you're sleeping with them. Not to get on a rant here for a second. But yeah, absolutely. You're right. And men just want somebody that has some strength and some power and some courage. And he has those things. Faults aside, we all have faults, right?
Absolutely. And I think, like, what a good mentor will do is, as kind of adapted to masculine love, is that we will set a challenge. We will set it to the perfect level, right? Not too hard that it's just overwhelming, not too easy that we're patronizing you, right? Perfect level of challenge. And we will coach you to help you get there. Mm-hmm. And I think guys are so hungry for that. Mm-hmm. I think especially in our generation where so many men were raised without dads, in divorced homes, right? Dads that were out working all the time, right? Like a lot of us didn't really get that type of attention. And I think that's so different from feminine love. I think feminine love is also really important, but that's more nurturing. It's more validating. It's more like kind of like wound healing, right? Whereas like masculine love is like, you're going to get wounded, but I'm going to make sure you don't die, right?
Yeah.
And like, I'm going to be kind of a hard ass of saying you got to do this, but then I'm also going to be walking and running right there next to you as you do it. And like, that is what so many men, I think, need. And once they get it, they realize that their lives just keep growing, right? Because we never got that fertilizer. We never got that like nutrient in our lives.
Absolutely, brother. I know when I am even missing it in my life, even now, not even, 30 years ago or whatever, but even now when I'm missing that in my life, I crave it. I crave it. And sometimes I find it in the wrong places if I'm not finding it in a healthy spot. If I'm not seeing that mentor or that other person and I want to put up my walls or I want to just, go do my own thing or whatever, I'm going to find it somewhere. I'm going to find it somewhere. It's going to be drugs or it's going to be women or it's going to be sex or it's going to be eating or it's going to be workaholism. Workaholism, just to say that a couple times for all the guys listening. It could be any of those things, right? We can be addicted to whatever we want, because instead of facing the challenge that's in front of us, like you said, and really saying, okay, this is a good thing. Challenge is a good thing. It means that I have something to overcome. And honestly, the more challenges that I overcome, the better I feel about myself and the more confident I am. And the better I'm like, you know what? The next challenge comes up. Let's do it.
Yeah. And, just to kind of close the loop on the challenge thing, like it prepares you for the ultimate challenge that everybody faces, which is death. Right? So I talked about the physical challenge, the mental, emotional challenge. And then the last challenge, I think, is a spiritual challenge, which is preparing to die. And that is, for me, and it's from Buddhist thought, I didn't make this up, but from Buddhist thought, the idea is like, that's what all this training is ultimately for. It's for that last moment so you can let it all go. Right? And for a lot of men, we're afraid of death, totally normal. We're afraid of getting old. We're afraid of losing our physicality. We're afraid of losing our minds. We're afraid of losing the people that we love. But the ultimate challenge in life that everyone will face, no matter what, right, is the aging and dying process. And I think when you see these boys, right, that are older, right, that are in their 60s and 70s, and that death is on the horizon, that's when all this kind of toxic stuff starts pouring out, because they weren't training, right? They started training way too late. I think we have to train really our whole lives to be able to let everything go at the end. So hopefully that's a motivator of like, that's why you do it, because the big challenge is coming, no matter whether you want it or not,
And we all know it intrinsically. Like anyone that the hero's journey always involves a part where the hero is willing to give up their life for something. Yes. It always is. Why are there so many superhero movies? Right? Why are there so many other non-superhero movies but still hero movies? Because we want to see, and also, just as a side note, why are most of them men? It's not because we dominate the world. It's because there's something about a guy that's willing to give up his life for what he believes in, for the people he cares about, to protect the women and children and everything else in his life. That's amazing. We are all drawn to that story. I don't care if you say I'm the most hardcore feminist ever, all men are evil. That person is still drawn to that story intrinsically. They won't admit it, but they're still drawn to that story because there's nothing greater than a friend who can lay down their life for a friend, right? Like that's the most amazing, beautiful thing at all.
Right. Like we are guardians, right? Like the males of the human species are guardians and protectors, and we protect the other parts of our species, right? And I think, I love Marvel, right? And a lot of the heroes, I love that in this new iteration, they're all traumatized, right? Like every single hero,
it's so much
where they
more
get their
accurate
power.
and real.
Yeah.
You can relate
their power
to it
comes
better.
from their trauma, and comes from the wounding, and comes from losing someone at a young age, or being in an accident, or whatever it is, right? And like that is such a powerful message that guys need to learn, is like those traumas can not will be, right? Because I think it takes work, but can be turned into superpowers if you put in the effort. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you're broken. But if you work it, you can become that Captain America or that Iron Man or that, Spider-Man, right? Like you can make that happen.
Yeah, and since we're talking about superheroes, my favorite superhero always, ever since I was a little kid, has been Batman. It's always been Batman. So
then trauma on that guy. Yeah.
Huh?
That guy's got a lot of trauma.
Oh, hell yeah, he does.
He lost his
But
whole family. Yeah.
the other reason I'm bringing him up specifically is that what I think is really interesting about the story, not only is there trauma and then he like has to go out and then all that sort of stuff, but he also has a shit ton of boy psychology.
Yes.
This fucking entitled billionaire dude who just doesn't give a fuck about a lot of things, but then he's really passionate about other things. Like it's really fascinating to watch like his masculinity on full display, but then his boy psychology on full display at the same time. So it's not like it's an either or. It's not like you're either living out your boy psychology or you're this fucking masculine man. No, it's a messy situation of both, man. Like I would love to say that I'm just always living out this healthy masculinity. Fuck no. My boy psychology comes out all the goddamn time. I get insecure. Even on this podcast, dude, I was thinking about this a while ago during our conversation when we were talking about how like we're trying to, measure up and everything else. Dude, I do it on this podcast. Like I try to be as real and vulnerable and authentic as possible, but I'm still thinking about like how I'm looking and how I'm talking to you and what conversations we're having and if this is connecting and how this is going to appear on social media. I mean, all that shit is still in my head.
Yeah.
And it doesn't fucking matter, but it's still there.
Me too. Me too. Right. I mean, I think we're still works in progress, and the culture is strong. There's I forget who wrote it. I'm blanking, but there's some great Batman runs where essentially it's flipped, and the idea is that Batman, right, the character, right, is the real personality, right, and Bruce Wayne is the alter ego.
Oh, interesting.
Right, like that's who he really is. But back to your point of being the derelict, right? Like Batman doesn't fit in anywhere. You can't just like hang out with Batman. He's intense as shit, right? So like he has to become this Bruce Wayne character to like fit into society, right? He has to be popular and have the cars and the private jet and the mansion, right? And I think like, I mean, relating to that you're talking about, it's like there is that boy psychology because I think we're in a very boyish culture where like you don't really fit in and you also won't be successful, right? I mean, you and I both run podcasts. We both offer, coaching and mentorship and therapy and things. And like, if we're not marketing, no one's going to know who we are. And that sucks because like, I got to put money into Google ads and shit, right? Like I got to like do SEO research. Like I have to play the game in order to get the message out there because there's such this like wave of insecure boys where they've made the rules.
I'm going to add this clip to the show notes because you just triggered a thought when you're saying this. And I know Dark Knight is not a new movie by any stretch of the imagination anymore. But there one scene that I love in that movie about by boy psychology and everything else is that, I don't know if you remember the scene or not, but there's a scene where Christian Bale, who obviously plays, Batman, is there as Bruce Wayne, and they're in a board meeting, and it's when the dude who ends up being the bad dude is there, and he comes in, and they're all talking about things, and all the board members are really into it, and he's sleeping. And when you first see that scene, you think, what an entitled, bratty, billionaire, boy psychology asshole, right? And what just clicked with me during this conversation is, but then what's the next scene? The next scene is him talking to Morgan Freeman, basically saying, no, that guy's wrong. He's a bad guy. We're not going with him. I was like, oh, isn't that fascinating, right? You see him living out his boy psychology, but he's not actually doing that. He's actually just completely against it because he already knows that this is not the right guy. Yes. And he's, as Batman, going to have to go get him and bring him to Gotham. And I just think that that's incredibly powerful, especially for our limited minds. So my encouragement, I guess, to everybody listening to this, don't just assume that what you're seeing is accurate. Don't just assume that because it looks like boy psychology it is, or just because it looks like true masculinity it is. Dig a little deeper. Try to figure out what's there. So I know we're about to wrap up, but any other words, Mark, you'd say to the men out there? Of course, just as another side note, we're going to have your information in the show notes. Again, Mark does therapy. He does retreats. Please check him out. I'm going to add the 4 books that you mentioned earlier.
For sure. Great.
We'll add that Batman clip. Again, reach out to us. We're here for you. We do mentoring, coaching, etc. But what else? Is there anything else, Mark, that you would just say, hey, if I'm a guy, I'm listening to this, I'm like, wow, this talk on boy psychology, really finding out my masculinity, trying to be open, trying to find mentors, etc. What would you leave those guys with today?
Yeah, I mean, I think just literally what you said, it's like, be open to it. Like take us up on our offers, take up other guys on their offers. Like the mentors are everywhere. There actually are quite a bit of men out there, but it's a much more quieter confidence, right? Where it's not like kind of blasting it to the heavens. But like, I speak from my own experience. Like I think when I was a young man and I was in boy psychology, I was very grandiose. I thought I was smarter than other dudes. I thought had it figured out. I thought I knew about the real world. Everyone else was like, a sheep. Right? I think a lot of guys feel that way. And I will tell you that you are wrong. You are wrong. Like there are other guys that get it and like give us a chance. Give those dudes a chance.
What's it going to hurt?
Conversation. Yeah.
What's it going to hurt, right, man?
Yeah.
Like
exactly.
You're telling me that you have so much fear that you won't reach out? Like really? Come on. That's really not that difficult of a thing to do.
Yeah.
We're not going to bite.
Like talk to other dudes because there are some that are quite open. And if you feel that gravitas from somebody, like latch onto that, like move towards that because it is rare and it is beautiful. And like, you can also get that too, move towards it.
And of course, as always, please like the episode if you liked it, like subscribe, watch, etc. Check out Mark's stuff. But most importantly, and I try to say this most episode, if you were listening to this and at any point during the episode, a dude that popped in your head, I don't care if you're a man or a woman listening to this right now, but some guy popped into your head just one time, send it to them, please. We do this because of the fact that we have a passion for this. Mark does this too. I'm not paying Mark. I'm not getting paid to do this. We're doing this because we have a passion for you guys, and we want you to grow into your true masculine selves. And guess what? We want all your friends to as well. We want your partners to. We want your dads to. We want your sons to. Everybody. So if one of those people popped in your mind, send it to them, please. Share the information. Mark, you're awesome, man. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so
Appreciate
much.
you.
Thank you.
All right, you guys. Well, until next time, you fucking derelicts, we'll see you soon.